Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Ahmaduhu wa asta'inuhu wa astadihi wa astaghfiruhu wa uminu bihi jalla wa ala wa la akfuruhu wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu. As-salahu bil huda wa din al-haq liyadhiruhu ala din kullihi walau kariha al-mushrikun. All praise belongs to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His help, His assistance, and His guidance. We believe in Him and do not disbelieve in Him. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His servant and messenger. Allah sent Him, that is Muhammad, with Deen al-Haq, the religion, the way, the methodology of truth, in this way of life known as Islam, will rise to its proper position in this world, whether the mushriks like it or not. Amma ba'd, فَإِنَّ أَصْدَقَ الْحَدِيثِ كِتَابُ اللَّهِ وَأَوْضَاقَ أَرُورَ كَلِمَةُ التَّقْوَى وَخَيْرُ الْمِلَالِ مِلَّةُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَخَيْرُ السُّنَنِ سُنَّةُ مُحَمَّدٍ sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We'd like to begin with Al-Bayan. This is what we distributed for one of our unity meetings at UC Berkeley, Al-Bayan, Wahda Conference, and its schedule. UC Berkeley Muslim Students publication, February in 1997. I brought this because this is kind of indicative of what we was about at that particular time. Remember, a movement means that there is movement. And a movement means that you're moving. Now, you may look at us now and say, we're not moving. That's the farthest from the truth you can get. We are a movement now, we were a movement then, and we hope to continue to be a movement because a movement has certain characteristics. One, that it has leadership, it has people, it has usually goals and directives and places they want to go and things they want to do. So this is Al-Bayan, Wahda Conference, and our most famous ayat, one of them, and hold fast all together to the rope of Allah, and be not divided amongst yourselves, and remember Allah's favor on you, for you were enemies one to another. But He joined your hearts together, so that by His grace you became brethren, and you were on the pit of fire, and He saved you from it. Thus Allah makes His verses clear to you that you may be guided. Of course, we say this every Jummah, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. And this Wahda, or unity meeting, has certain characteristics. Of course, this is Friday, February 21st, 1997, and it's at UC Berkeley, and it'll be a pre-program. It starts on Jummah, and it has registration. The khutbah will be given by Dr. Hamid Algar. Then one of the main lectures that night at 7:30 p.m. will be a lecture, Malcolm X, Examples of Activism and Empowerment, by Imam Musa and Muhammad Abdullah. It'll be at the Science Building. Okay, that means that night the main lecture would be Malcolm X. That means an example of activism and empowerment. And of course, myself and Muhammad Abdullah. Muhammad Abdullah is from LA. He's active for generations. And so we spoke together. And now, of course, the khutbah was given by Dr. Hamid Algar. Does anybody know who Dr. Algar was? Dr. Algar is a European. When I first came home from the penitentiary in '76, I wanted to meet all the Muslims. And now, of course, I was right there in Oakland next to Berkeley. And so Berkeley was a hub at that time as it is now. And so I went around I was in what we call at that time the World Community of Islam in the West, which was Imam Muhammad's community. But it hadn't opened up yet. It was still in a transition. So to visit all the Muslims was new. Now I'm coming out of the penitentiary and I'm just juiced up with Islam, so I want to meet all the Muslims. It just so happens that Berkeley, right next to Oakland, was a wonderful place to get indoctrinated into Islam. So not only whether it was the Nation of Islam, whatever it was, but it was a good area for Islam. So anyway, I went out to Berkeley and to find some of the Muslims. And I found a good group of Muslims, some Sufi, all kind of Muslims. And that was in '76. Now in '76, of course they had Salatul Juma there, and UC Berkeley had a multiplex of Muslims. It was all kind of Muslims. So I would go over there sometime to meet the various Muslims. I would also go to the Islamic Center way over in San Francisco. The Islamic Center was, at that time, the only masjid in the Bay Area, or in my part of the Bay Area, where there were so-called Sunni Muslims, and it was a nice large group, you know. San Jose had another group, but all the masajid in those days were like, they were nothing like they are now. This would have been the biggest masjid in the United States, probably. Easy. But because it's bigger than the Islamic Center over there. The Islamic Center is more orientated, but when you come in here, you got room. Yes. So technically, probably, yeah, at this time, this would have been easily the biggest, except one or two places. But now, to get back to where we're heading here, that was a wonderful time for Islam in America. There was a few national African-American Islamic groups. Of course, there was the Dar al-Islam movement in New York, but there was the Islamic Party right here in D.C., and there was Imam Muhammad, the World Community of Islam in the West, as we called it at that time. It was also, at that time, Imam Muhammad's community was not mixing a lot. We was just coming out of the Nation of Islam, and the newspaper at that time had a transitional status. You could see that it was moving from one place to another. But for Islam, it was a wonderful period, because for us, it was coming into something almost new. The whole idea of being in the past, black man is God, white man is the devil, that type of thing. We're coming into a new global acceptance of Islam. When I got out of Leavenworth, I came out with that openness When I got to the Masjid in Oakland, everybody was still locked in the past. Man, I would go to the Islamic Center in San Francisco, and a load of new books that came. One of the parents from Pakistan had bought a whole ton of Islamic books. Maulana Maududi and all of those wonderful books on Islam to help her son stay in Islam. That's what she had bought it for. But she donated to the group, and the books were there free for everybody, and nobody wanted them. I looked at all them books, and I got a stack of them myself, and then I got a whole bunch of them for the masjid. When I got to the masjid with all those books, Fahim Shuaib told me, he said, I have to check with the chief on all of these books, you know, so he could go through them and see what they... I said, fine. It was probably years before they got distributed. He might have read them all himself.
Right.
But he didn't let them out. Because remember, we're in transition, 76. Elijah Muhammad then died the year before, maybe 74 in the 70s. Was it the winter of 74? Yeah. So he had passed away, 74, 75. And the community was going through transition, you know, our community. By 76, it was still in the middle, or the early stages of moving from the black man as God, the white man as the devil, to the Sunnah. Well, now we're praying and we're doing all of that, but most of the people don't know how to pray. Prayer, 5 daily prayers, all that, you're standing up and sitting down and all that stuff, you know. So anyway, let me pick up. So now, by 1997, we're having a program in Berkeley, UC Berkeley. I want you to imagine, UC Berkeley was a hub of rebellion in the 1960s, and it was a hub of Islam in the 1990s, 80s, 90s, and all that. So the next day, February 22nd, at 9 a.m., opening comments and lecture by Imam Musa. So now you got to remember, we're having a program there, and all of our West Coast affiliates are there. So this is a program with 1,000 people easy. I mean, it's just packed with mostly it's Muslim students. Of course, a lot of black people too from the area. But this is a movement on wahda, on unity. This was the call, actually it was coming out of Iran, wahda, unity, you know. And so that night we have a lecture by Mahmoud Abdul Rauf. His is at 7:30. Then the next day, the 23rd, which would be Saturday. And this was a standard outline of many programs in those days. It starts on Friday, maybe a Jummah. Then you have Saturday, the main day. And then you have Sunday, and it's trickling off. It's a wrap-ups. All day Sunday, usually like final session, summary from different workshops and what have you. This was from our Unity Conference in 1997. So technically I want to start now from one of our As-Sabiqun, As-Sabiqun on the Move. This is our newsletter. And what I'm going to recommend is that we got a whole stack of newsletters from 1995 up until 2000. Maybe the last one is 13, but this 10 and 12, and there's only a few at that time. We would just wrap it up that period. That's a good period for the Islamic movement. Now, we're going to talk about some of the, this is 1996, and by 1996 I had been here 7 years technically, because I came here in '89. So this is, now, when we had this As-Sabiqun, one of our training outlines, which is talking about 4 stages of growth for the Islamic movement. The first stage is Masjid. When you establish yourself in an area, the first thing that a Muslim should be on their schedule is a Masjid. A place for people to go. Now, like right now, you would think that's natural. But at that time, going backwards from here, it was people prayed in houses. They had Jummah, Salatul Jummah in apartments.
Yeah.
This Masjid all over America is a big deal. On most university campuses, sometimes they prayed in the basement of a chapel. We might have a big floor down in the chapel, you know, and we covered little crosses and stuff or what have you. And probably on the universities, at least 80% were in the 80s and 90s. 80% of it was probably in chapels down at the bottom. Or we was just growing out of the stage of apartments and houses that were rented near the campus, and that was the masjid. You know, that was the masjid. That's at a pretty developing time. Now at every university, you have a masjid right there near the university. And believe it or not, most of the money we raised for our activities, a lot of it, was at those centers. Why? Because there was no board of directors. It was a good free period. It was a good Islamic flavor period. It's not like now. You can go places you won't get an Islamic flavor at all. But right now, everybody, and they see African Americans, you a Muslim? You know Al-Fatiha? And then, sure, I know Al-Fatiha. Then we would recite it. My goodness. You got to remember, they're immigrant Muslims now. They didn't come here to establish no Islam, but they came here, their mothers and fathers told them to go to the little masjid, and around the country, everybody was going to the little masjid to pray. And as time went on, those little masajid around the universities began to grow, and they bought land, and they got a house, and they got an apartment, and they had Salatul Jummah. And around the universities every day, everybody would go for Salatul Jummah, they would go for the 5 daily prayers, you know, and that was mostly around the universities. At our masjid in the African American neighborhood, we were just getting that thing of going to pray all day and every day. You know, we were still just, you know, technically, at this time we had learned how to pray. Yeah, 97, we was on a roll by then. We was on a roll by then. Many immigrants were mixing with African Americans in their masjid, you know, okay. And you could tell that when you would first go to our masjid in the 80s and the 90s, you didn't see a stingy bottles, because nobody cared nothing about a stingy. You know, just made wudu was just, you know, wudu. And so, as time went on, you could tell little things about that. By the 90s and the 2000s, You're finding extension bottles in all of our centers. I mean, black centers. Of course, they're in all the immigrant Masjid. Okay, that was a good period of uncontrolled growth and friendly development of Islam. In other words, like we could go, all the money we raised for our centers, like in Oakland and all that, we had money put aside, but we could go, we jumped in a car and went up. First we stopped at Eugene, Oregon. Then we raised, I don't know how many thousands of dollars. Then we got in the car and went up to Corvallis, Oregon. Remember, these are all universities, close to universities. And we raised more money. We went up to Seattle, and these are immigrant mosques on the West Coast. We raised money, and then we'd come back. Because see, we didn't go to any African American centers because they were all under Imam Muhammad. And the brothers felt that they needed all of their money, and they wasn't going to give any money to other Negroes because they not with the chief. That was the feeling. So, I mean, we'd go, just imagine the feeling. You go and you could go to the Masjid, for instance, in Texas, 1901 Musa Street. Then we went to that Masjid, and the doors were locked and everything. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we've been on the highway all that time. My son and a couple of more brothers, we just climbed in the windows and went in. That's the way it was in those days. We climbed in the windows and went to sleep, and then people got there at Fajr time, oh, Salaam Alaikum, and da-da-da-da-da. We got up, made wudu, and made prayer, and went back to sleep. And at Jummah time, we just talked. You didn't have to get no security from the big sheikh or the imam. You said, oh, we're from California. We're raising money for our masjid. We would like to make an announcement. Sure. So after Jummah, we make an announcement. And we may raise $500, $1,000, or something like that. Now, in those days, that was a lot of money. Right. Plus, we didn't have outgo like we do now. We got expenses now. We didn't have everything we raised. All we had to do was pay our gas money. And we didn't have hotels because we stayed in the masjid or slept in the car. We went all